I'm here to talk about women and children in the mills, but before I do, Lancaster being the oldest town in Worcester County, and I'm from the Mendon, Milford, Hopedale area. Mendon was the second oldest town in Worcester County. It was incorporated in 1667, so slightly later. Also a mother town. Mendon spawned Milford, Bellingham, Uxbridge, Upton, Blackstone, Northbridge, and Millville. Hopedale was Mendon's grandbaby because Hopedale was part of Milford and then broke off in 1886. And Milford was not happy because Hopedale was hugely successful and was a big part of their tax base. And so, yeah, that's another story. Also, there's another thing in common because Hopedale was founded as a utopian community during what's called the Associationist period in the 1840s, as was Fruitlands in Harvard. So there's another thing in common between that area and here. Of course, Hopedale lasted 15 plus years, and Fruitlands lasted 6 months with Louisa May Alcott and her sister and mother scrambling for food in the fall and almost starving to death. But, you know, that's another story too. This quote here, "For every reason and for no reason at all," is from the Lowell Offering, which was the mill girls' newspaper. Because not only did they work 14 to 16 hours a day, 6 days a week, but they put out their own newspaper because, you know, they had plenty of time on their hands. And this quote, I love this quote because they give a whole list of reasons why the girls come to the mills. And it's New England farm girls that are going to the mills in Lowell. And this girl says, "The girls are here for every reason and for no reason at all. One is in the factory because she hates her mother-in-law. One has a wealthy father, but he wishes his daughters to maintain themselves. The next is here because there is no better place for her." That sounds reasonable. "The next has a, quote, well-off mother, but she is a very pious woman and will not buy her daughter so many pretty gowns and collars and ribbons, so she concluded to help herself." That one I don't buy. Would you work 16 hours a day in a dirty, dusty, awful mill, dangerous situation to buy yourself ribbons and gowns? You'd last about 2 weeks and you'd be gone. "The next is here because her home is a lonesome country village and she cannot bear to remain where it is so dull." That one I kind of buy because Lowell was hopping. It really was. "The next is here because her parents are poor and she wishes to acquire the means to educate herself." That one I also believe. Because the mill girls went to Lowell for a variety of reasons, and they purposefully advertised for these girls to come to Lowell, to farm girls, because they're educated and they're used to hard work. It's what New England farm girls are used to. And because they were Protestant, they could read. But we also have to talk about kids and the definition of childhood. I love this little boy. He's the munchkin. He's just adorable. This would not be a local picture. This boy is probably on the Lower East Side of New York City, a picture by Lewis Hine, who was photographing children in labor situations. He had been a teacher, and he wanted to show the world what was happening out there with these kids working. Now, I don't know if this child was working. He looks to me about 3 years old. Probably not. We found another picture. We didn't use it here. My son is my graphic designer, which is awesome. And the picture wasn't a great picture quality-wise. And it was of what Lewis Hine called a truant at Boston Harbor, little barefoot child running around the boats. And he looked to be about 5 years old. And I thought to myself, would you call a 5-year-old a truant? I don't know, maybe. Compulsory education here in Massachusetts goes way back. In England, there's a big, what I like to call a dichotomy between rich kids and poor kids. Wealthy kids were well educated, they got what they needed, and poor kids were considered small adults. They weren't considered children, the way we think about children today. And that's something that changed with Bronson Alcott, because he believed that kids should go to school and they should be allowed to have playtime and they should be allowed to be creative. And that was crazy thinking at the time. Children were a part of a family, and if you were poor, everybody had to work. Even in Hopedale, which had mills along the Mill River, wasn't just the Drapers, it was very diverse. When they started their communal experiment, living in one house, which didn't last long, they all hated it, don't blame them. Even the kids worked, and everybody was paid. So it was something that everybody had to do. Sorry, I have one hand, so I have to switch back and forth between this and that. Is this a child? I mean, the Munchkin, yeah. But is this boy, and I'm pretty sure this is a British picture because it's harder to find pictures of teenage boys. Lewis Hine liked to concentrate on the little ones, although there's a lot of pictures of teenagers, but I liked this picture. He's probably about, what, 14 or 15, I'd say? Maybe 12 or 13, but still. We would consider that a child today, but my son was working at 14. We went to the school department and we got him a little thing, a license or whatever they call it, so that he could work. And he was allowed to work. I homeschooled my kids. And he worked at the Ecotarium in Worcester and loved it, worked there for years. But we have to do that purposefully now. Back then, you know, if you were 5 or 6, chances are you were going to work. And this is a quote from Lewis Hine. And he said that the reason to hire children is because they're cheaper. Yeah, they also, yeah.
I'm sorry, who is Lewis Hine?
Lewis Hine was a teacher, and he got a camera and started taking photographs in New York City. And they became so, I want to say important, but popular to show these photographs. This would have been glass plate negatives. This is the early 1900s. That he quits his job teaching and basically goes around the country, the national, I've got the name written down in here somewhere. There was a group that sent him around the country to photograph kids in working situations to make this now growing middle class in this country aware of what's happening within their own borders. And it does change things, but not as much as we would like. It's a hard thing to change. In England, they actually had laws that kept kids from working under the age of 9. And if they were under 13, you could only work a certain number of hours a day. So the factory owners would advertise for children who looked at least 13. So he could get them when they were younger and pay them less. And the parents were actually up in arms about this because these are children bringing in money to the family. It's not like they're working for pocket money. This is money to keep a family going. And the families were angry when their kids couldn't work. They didn't want their children to be sidelined and to be schooled. They wanted them working to bring in money. So it's hard for us to wrap our heads around. Lewis Hine's photographs are on the Library of Congress website. You can look at them. And if you have a persnickety child who thinks that, you know, life is so tough, have them look at these photos. It's an eye-opener. It really is. Anyway, I love this picture. Is this a soldier? Okay, so Civil War project, first project I did with my students at Worcester State. They were redoing the Soldiers Monument on the Common in Worcester. They were cleaning it, and I was on the Grand Army of the Republic Board of Trustees in Worcester, and they asked, my chair asked if my class could do research on 398 names on there, on the monument. And we figured it was going to be like a pamphlet. It ended up being like a 200-page book with photographs. We found so many pictures. Not only the Antiquarian Society, which I believe is where this picture came from, but there's 2 pictures of Charles Everett. One was in a collection of a man who was the archivist at Clark University. He's now retired. And he let us, because he was a Civil War collector, collected all paper from the Civil War, spent $800 on an envelope. I mean, the man was just crazy collector. But we look at the statistics for Charles F. Everett. He's listed in the official records as 18 years old. He's listed as a drummer. He's listed as 5 feet, 4.5 inches tall. And then I go down to Mark's house in Connecticut. He lives in Thompson, Connecticut, and I'm scanning his picture, and he pulls out the other picture of Charles Everett, an adorable picture, not as good quality, so my son wouldn't let me use it. And I scan it, and I go back to my home, and I call the friend I'm working with this class, and I say, Charles Everett can't be more than 13 or 14. And Zach's like, but the official records say he's 18. That's not an 18-year-old. I found him. He was from Norton, Massachusetts, believe it or not. He was born around 1850, about 1850, because in the census records they always do the about. His father died. His mother sent him to Worcester to live with family relatives, and he ends up at school in Worcester, and then joins the Army in 1864. And he dies at the Battle of the Wilderness in 1864. Yes, some of you know about the Battle of the Wilderness. He was a drummer boy, and he was told to stay behind with the wagons, but he'd obviously bonded with the soldiers, and when things went south, literally, he ran out to try and help and was killed. And there's a couple of descriptions, one that he died on the battlefield, one that he was taken prisoner. We're not 100% sure. His mother went and after her mother's pension because her son is now dead. Her only son is dead. What a face. And the project we did got him on the front page of the Telegram and Gazette. In what year was that? 2016 we did this? And they did it in color, this little picture being held by gloved hands at the Antiquarian Society on a red background. It was beautiful to be able to give him back his life and to know that he died at the age of 14 or 15. You know, this is what kids did. It was part of what they did. So if we're going to talk about the mills, we have to start with what brought in textiles to this country on a mill-like scale, because people had been spinning and weaving before Samuel Slater comes. But British government kept the industry to themselves. They would not let what they knew about weaving and spinning on a mass scale out until Samuel Slater leaves, and of course in England he's called Slater the Trader, which I thought was fun. And he comes here in 1790, and he brings the information in his head on how to do, and what they're doing is they're doing the spinning. They're doing spinning on a mass scale. And it's called the Rhode Island system, and families work for him. It's not just men. It's men, it's women, and it's children. It's families. And they spin, and then they take what they've spun home, and they weave it on their looms. So you have entire families working for him, living in his housing, shopping at his store, which of course leads to debt. And that's the system that Samuel Slater brings to Rhode Island, and it spreads. Hopedale, Mendon, Milford, Blackstone Valley, it spreads all along the Blackstone River. Anywhere you have moving water, you can have one of these mills. I mean, yeah, there's mills that predate this, you know, your grist mill for grinding grains and making bread, and your sawmills. But this is where you get into industry. And what he's doing is only one part of it. The weaving is still happening in the home. In Hopedale, we have a museum called the Little Red Shop, which is supposedly the first mechanic shop on the Mill River after they come and they actually broke ground for it in the summer of 1842. Although the sign that's hanging outside of it says 1841, and every time I go there I'm like, you got the date wrong. They broke ground in 1842. They don't start using it until 1843. But in there we have what's called a barn loom, which came out of Holden, out of a barn in Holden. And I don't know why the Draper Company bought this loom. I think they were trying to show, you know, how weaving had changed up until you get to Draper's Northrop loom, which changed everything. And I was just watching, there's a documentary on Slatersville that's been done. I think he's got 6 parts now, but I've only seen through part 5, and part 5 would have been around World War I. And they're showing pictures of inside the Slater mills around World War I, and what are they weaving on? Draper Northrop looms from Hopedale. Because the Draper Company becomes the largest manufacturer of cotton automatic looms in the world. Not in the country, not in the state, in the world. Until, you know, Japan and the Toyota loom and all that stuff. Anyway, when he comes here, there's 2.4 million spindles making thread in England. The first U.S. cotton spinning mill had 100. So you can see how far behind we are. We catch up really quickly. Anyway, by 1810, so he's been here, what, 30 years at that point? There are 700 mills in New England. 700. And they're carding and spinning, because that's still what they're doing. And then we get to our mill girls. And this is Lowell. This is the 1820s. And you have what's called the Lowell system, where they put everything under one roof. The cotton goes in one end of the building, it's carded, it's spun, it's put onto looms, and it's woven, and it comes out the other end of the building as cloth. No more home weaving. No more having to do that in your home. I'm a hand weaver, so I like weaving, but it's a lot of work, and I can't do it right now. Anyway, 1814, you get the first power looms. These are powered by water, which is not the best thing for powering looms. It's hard to make a loom work consistently with water power. You know, a grist mill and a sawmill, you don't need as much delicacy as you do with weaving. And it's the problem. The Lowell mills are weaving cloth, but the cloth is so subpar to what you can get from Europe that it's considered what they call gray goods. It's for sheeting, it's for shirting, and it's for slave clothing. That's basically what it is. It won't get better until after the Civil War. And then finally we will start producing really good cloth. And then when the drapers come up with the Northrop loom, that changes everything. Because that's an automatic loom that can change its own shuttles. It can change the bobbin on the shuttle. And then you don't need one operative for one loom or one operative for 2 looms. You go from needing one operative for 100 looms. And so it changes everything. Anyway, the mill girls. It's purposeful. You get farm girls to do this work because they're used to hard work. They're used to hard work for no money because they're working for their families. You know, they got room and board. They're paid a couple bucks a week. They're working 6 days a week. They're working 14 to 16 hours, depending on the season. That's why I can't see some girl working to buy new dresses. I just can't buy it, but I could be wrong. I could be wrong. And these girls, they would cut their pay, sometimes for no reason. Often it depended on what was going on the season. It's not like it is today where you get a certain pay when you start a job and then it kind of goes up over time. This was if our work is slow, you're either not working or you're getting a pay cut. And these girls, some of the first job actions in the country, and it horrified the men that the girls would, basically what they called it, turning out. They would just walk out of the mill. They didn't usually do it for more than a couple of hours, and then they'd walk back in. They'd do it. And Lowell was considered, I don't know, almost the cream of this whole system. Charles Dickens visited Lowell. Aidan Ballou, who founded Hopedale, visited Lowell. And he was a staunch abolitionist, but I don't think the penny dropped for him that what they were weaving came from cotton that was grown on the plantations in the South. I don't think it ever dropped for him that that's what he was looking at. And that what they were weaving was going back down there to clothe the slaves that were working on those plantations. I'm not sure he got that. Maybe he did, but he didn't write about it. Anyway, let's see. 80 to 90% of the people working in Lowell are women. They live in boarding houses, usually a house where they have maybe half a dozen girls per bedroom and an outhouse out back, and usually a matron that kind of, cooked for them and kept things. They would self-educate. They would hire people to come in and lecture while they were on breaks and on Sundays. They had a lyceum on Sunday. They were required to go to church. The company required them to go to church. So not only are you working, Monday to Saturday, but you're required to go on your one day off to church. So anyway, Harriet Martineau, who was a British writer, visited Lowell, and she said about the mill girls that they were not highly educated, but they had pleasure in books and lectures, in correspondence with home, and they had their minds so open to fresh ideas as to be drawn off from thoughts of themselves and their own concerns. When at work, they were amused with thinking over the last book they had read, or with planning the account they should write home of last Sunday's sermon. I'm sure they were thinking of a lot more than that. Or with singing over to themselves the song they meant to practice in the evening. And when evening came, because they were working 14 to 16 hours, nothing was heard of tired limbs and eagerness for bed. But if it was summer, they sallied out the moment tea was over for a walk. And if it was winter, to the lecture room or to the ballroom for a dance. And I think she was accurate about that. And that's what their little newspaper was about. They would write about who came to lecture and who was writing this, and they'd write poetry, and different girls would write and publish in this Lowell offering. And I love the fact that these girls are working so hard, and yet they're producing their own newspaper, they're hiring people to come and lecture them, they're pooling their funds to do that, which is actually really, really cool. Now, Lewis Hine, the photographer, who went about taking pictures of women and kids working, particularly children. That was his thing. He came to Massachusetts a lot. He came to New Bedford and to Fall River, where the big mills were. He was in Boston. He took that picture of the truant in Boston Harbor. He took pictures of kids in the bogs on the Cape. He was out in Western Mass, Springfield, East Hampton. This picture is from Winchendon. It was the closest I could come to this area because that was the only one he came to. Unfortunately, my advancer works, but my little pointer, you can't see it on the TV screen. You can see it over there, but you can't see it on the TV screen. So I can't point out, but you can see this little girl here in the front. She's pretty young. I'd say she got to be 7, 8, maybe 9. And I love the fact that he got the girls in the front to pay attention to him, but the girls up on the steps are like talking and just having fun and, banter. I think there's a couple of young men there, but not many. They hired women and girls and children because they were cheaper. Women often did a better job. They would say, the women are better at this, and yet they would pay them a fraction of what they paid the men, about 2/3 less. Well, about 2/3 of what the men made. And the kids made even less. They were making about 1/3. So this is about capitalism and economics. Period, end of story. You can say, oh, the kids have tiny hands and they can get under and tie, the broken warp threads. Yeah, okay, I'll agree with you on that. But it's because they're tiny and they're cheap that we're going to hire them in droves and just send them into these mills and have them work. Anyway, this is Winchendon, closest I could find. Kids had accidents in the mills at 3 times the rate of adults. And trust me, if you were killed in a mill or injured, if you're dead, your parents are getting nothing. And if you're injured, you're out of a job. It's just the way it was. I found this. This is in Dover, New Hampshire. There was a cotton factory, and this is 1822. They wanted to hire 50 smart, capable girls between 12 and 25 years of age to work in the factory, to whom constant employment and good encouragement will be given. So they do. 1828, the Dover mill changes hands, and the girls' pay is cut, although the men's pay is not. So half of the 800 girls working there walked out, and that was in 1828. And the Dover Inquirer is incensed. How dare these girls walk out? A general turnout of the girls employed in the cotton factories in this town to the number of 600 or 800 took place on Friday last, on account of some imaginary grievance. It has, we believe, turned out to be to their cost as well as disgrace. And since that time, many of them have returned to work, and all who are permitted will, without doubt, return in the course of a few days. You could cut the girls, they thought they could cut the girls' pay easier than the men. And, this is the 1820s. In the 1950s, after the soldiers come back from the war, late 1940s, 1950s, it's, well, women, go back to your homes. Men have to work. They've got to take care of their families. Come on. It's not what it's about. It's not what it's about. Anyway, I don't want to get caught up in this, but I do. I put this one in. I put this one in for me. We did not cut off his head. Lewis Hine did that. And according to the caption, because he wrote down a caption for every photograph he took, and often names and ages, this man threw the 17-year-old boy he was working with under the bus and said that he had pulled the wrong leather and crushed the man's hand. Well, maybe. It's possible. It's also possible because somebody was going to be out of work for causing this accident, that the man ratted the boy out because, that way the boy gets fired and he might be able to keep his job as overseer because this man was the overseer. I love the dirty little thumb. I don't know if you could see it peeking out there. I put that in for me. I couldn't help myself. This was dangerous work. I mean, we think about cloth as being something soft and comfy. This is dangerous work. I got some nice accidents here. 1828, so this is really early. This is like really early in them having big mills. Mary Richards, she's about 10. She's working on a drawing frame, and her apron is caught by the shaft, and one of the overseers ran out to help, and this is what he says to the newspaper. He saw her whirled around and around with the shaft. He heard the bones of her arms, legs, thighs, etc., successfully snap asunder crushed seemingly to atoms as the machinery whirled her round and drew tighter and tighter her body within the works. Her blood was scattered over the frame and streamed upon the floor. Her head appeared dashed to pieces. I know. It's Sunday afternoon, stop this, there's food over there. Yeah, you can eat after. This was seriously dangerous work. I mean, I think of Hopedale as being this benign place, and they had the mills on the river, and the kids worked, but they didn't work necessarily in the mills. And by mills, I'm talking little tiny buildings that did a few things, you know, a sawmill, a grist mill. They were making some textile equipment, but they weren't weaving cloth. They never have woven cloth in Hopedale at all, ever. But some man, and I've forgotten his name now, and he's buried in Hopedale Village Cemetery. I have to go and find his stone again. He got his arm caught in the machinery. And it was, the way they described it in the paper was it was torn almost from his body. And he died because they could not staunch the blood flow, and he lasted a couple days and then he died. This was not just kids, and it was dangerous. You're working around machinery, and you're the first people working around this kind of machinery. So you're kind of the guinea pigs as they're figuring out what works and what doesn't. And you have no choice. If you've been crushed by the wrong lever, you're not working. And the chances are the company's throwing you out the door. There's no safety net here. I don't know if you want me to read any more. In Albany, 1863, this is in the summer, a shoddy mill. Do you guys know what shoddy is? Shoddy. It is, but what they did was they would have people go around and collect textiles that were beyond their lifespan. And they would take all that textile, you know, separate it into wool and cotton, which is basically what you had, and they would turn it into new textile by breaking it down and recarding it and respinning it. It was mostly cotton up here, but we had woolen mills too. And that was shoddy. It was cheaper. It was recycled. It's kind of cool. But this is a shoddy mill in Albany, New York, where there's a fire. Information reached here this afternoon of the destruction of the fire of Hearst's shoddy mill and the burning to death of 15 female operatives. The flames spread with fearful rapidity, and only means of escape left the girls were the windows. Some of them were so terror-stricken that they abandoned themselves to their fate and perished in the building. Others fell from the windows, sounds like it wasn't first floor, to the fire below, and many were badly injured by jumping onto the ground. 25 are missing, 15 of whom are reported to have been burned to death. This will happen again and again, culminating in the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire in New York City, which I think was pre-World War I. And that was, I believe, on the 4th or 5th floor. And they locked the exits because they didn't want the girls leaving with any of the cloth in their voluminous skirts, you know, just stuffing the cloth in to take home and sew into things. And so one exit was open, the rest were locked, and the one that was open, they would check you as you were leaving. So when the fire starts and spreads, there's no way out because there's the one exit. They did have an elevator at that time, but I believe it very quickly became a death trap too. So, you know, fires in these places happened fairly frequently. And there is another one with a girl torn to ribbons in a paper mill. But I don't have to read that one for you. They were very graphic. I know my grandmother, who was born, I want to say 1892 or 93, she said that the newspaper she was reading when I was growing up in the 1970s were so much less graphic than when she was a child. She said the descriptions of people getting into the brand new car accidents, oh, so graphic. She never drove. She wouldn't. She was like, nope, I'm not driving. And here's another Lewis Hine photograph of a girl Can't tell if she's barefoot on this one, but you can see the dust on the floor. Now, in the winter, they were cold. In the summer, they kept the windows shut because it would keep the humidity in and help to keep the dust manageable and help the cloth. But imagine being in these mills, 95 degrees, high humidity. It must have been horrific. It must have been absolutely horrific. All right, so Britain had passed a Factory Act. I think I told you about this already. 1833, they passed an act to try and keep kids out of these situations. We won't actually get one until the Depression. We won't actually get an act until the Depression. This was also in Winchendon, and I love her. According to Lewis Hine, her name was Mamie Labarge, but it's actually Laberge. And she was French-Canadian. She was working at the Glen Allen Mills in Winchendon, and she's adorable. According to Lewis Hine, she was under legal age, but I don't know if that's true or not. He took a dozen pictures of Mamie, either by herself, 6 of them by herself, or there she is right in center. Mm-hmm. My son noticed that. I didn't. Look at that face. There she is, right in the center of that picture. She's working at the Glen Allen Mills, which were the White brothers. They'd been doing business in the area since 1813, cotton manufacturing. So that's really early. They made denim at Glen Allen. And this would have been, I think, around 1909 maybe, early 1900s. So denim is huge. Denim is huge because it's work pants. It's work pants, it's Levi's. They had mills, the White brothers in West Boylston, the West Boylston Manufacturing Company. It's one of the oldest cotton mills in New England, which makes it one of the oldest cotton mills in the country because we had the first because of Samuel Slater. Anyway, nope, don't go that way. Go that way. Oh, nope, let's go back here. The group shot here, 1900s, so this is just after that. 2 million children are working in mills, mines, fields, factories, stores, or on city streets. That's 18% of the kids in the country, which is a lot. They try to change the law in this country, and they passed the Owen Bill in 1916. So that's just before we get into World War I. It's supposed to limit the working hours of children and forbid interstate sale of goods that are produced by child labor. Supreme Court says that's unconstitutional. That's the end of that until 1938, when they finally passed a Child Labor Act. And that was done during the Depression to keep kids from taking jobs from grown men. So that's what happens. This is Mamie there in the front with her family. I love the woman with her arms crossed and the plaid dress and the awesome hair. You can tell she's not staying in the mills for long. She has plans to move on. But they're in front of, I'm going to assume that's worker housing. And they've got nice curtains, which they've probably made themselves to make that a nice place to be.
I like the dog.
I like the dog too. I always like the dogs. According to Lewis Hine, Mamie Laberge, or Labarge, is part of and a part of her family, of which there are 13 in all, 9 in the mill. So either the other 4 are too young or too old to be in the mill, or potentially injured. And somebody from Winchendon found her descendants, Mamie's. She was a really huggy grandma. We loved to cuddle up in her lap and snooze. She was very well endowed, so we used her as pillows. We would bounce on her lap, and she would say, "Trot, trot to Boston, trot, trot to Lynn, you better watch out or you'll fall in." And then she would open her legs and we would go flying down to her rug. So that was her granddaughter. I thought that was an awesome find. And that's the beauty of the Lewis Hine photos, is he tells you often who these people are, if he can get them to tell their names. Because the kids know that they're going to be outed if they give their names. So a lot of them are very careful not to. And Mamie and her family were French Canadian, so they didn't speak English well. So which is why he got her last name wrong, because it's LaBerge, not LaBarge. Anyway, more kids in the mills, and you can see dust on the floor. This is a spinning mill. This is at least potentially one end of the mill, because they spin and then weave at the other end. Basically, you know, conveyor belt of making cloth. I can see, oh, looking behind them, that looks like they might be fans. I can't, no, no. They've got drive wheels, they've got belts on them. It's not fans. And look, there's only a few scattered light fixtures. Imagine how dark that would be after, say, 4 or 5 o'clock in December. Yeah, they probably didn't work very late in the winters, particularly before electric light. And this, obviously, those are electric lights. So, and gas light would have been scary, dangerous, yeah. No, those are some kind of pull wheel, some kind of, so it's not fans. And the fact that the cotton is sitting on the floor, probably not fans in there, because that would blow things around. You wanted to keep the cotton dust down. So having fans, I think, would probably be a bad idea. This photograph always makes me nervous, because men had positions of power over these girls. And I'm sure this overseer may have been a very nice man, but who knows? And there was no Me Too movement back then. And these girls were in positions of where they had men who had basically their working lives in their hands, and the money coming home to their families in their hands. And, you know, that power of being able to do whatever they wanted to in their hands. Lewis Hine, the groups that he took the photographs for would do presentations with their glass negatives or magic lantern slides showing these children, and so their names would be out. And they may not want people to know that they were working at these factories underage, because there were compulsory education laws in Massachusetts from the 1600s, and you were supposed to go to school. Yeah, so I mean, a lot of the kids were very squirrely about giving their names, and a lot of them were immigrants and didn't speak English, so he knew that too. He used to travel with his daughter, which I'm sure made a lot of the younger girls comfortable letting him take their pictures. I'm just very surprised that he took so many pictures of Mamie, because anyway, I'll wrap it up with the whole idea of, did Drapers hire children, and other places around here? They said they didn't. Eben Draper became governor of Massachusetts 1908. So right around the time, I know there was a man who from, was it Clinton, became governor of Massachusetts, 1910. So it's right around the same time frame. And he insisted they did not hire children, and then we found this picture with the two little shuttle boys in the front. I mean, come on. We've got you. Yes, I found that online, and I'm like, he was governor just after Eben Draper was governor. Back when you were governor for 1 year. What do you do in a year? Come on.
Was that Bigelow?
I don't know. It's in my notes. I'll find it. I haven't gotten there yet. Anyway, found this guy who was a 40-year draper man. His name was Patrick Birmingham. He's from Milford, and he says to the newspapers, because they keep running him in the newspapers because he worked there for 40 years, 50 years. The man kept working. Well, of course he did. There was no retirement plan. He said he'd worked there 61 years, and he started in 1873 at the age of 22. And then Patrick dies, and his obituary outs him. He started at 14 years old. because he was born in 1859, not 1851, he was telling the Milford Daily News. He'd been adding years to his own life in order to keep the Drapers from being embarrassed that the man had started there at 14. I don't think he's one of the shuttle boys in this picture, but
What do you think the origin of that picture is? It looks like a composite to me.
you know, I keep telling my son that, and he keeps saying, no, it's fine. It's fine. Yeah, I haven't seen the glass negative of this picture. All I've ever seen is a photographic copy of it. So I can't tell you if this is a composite. People think Photoshop is something new. They used to do this stuff all the time. Yeah, so I think it's a composite too.
Yep. Tell your son that.
He's wrong. Yeah, that will go well.
I was thinking that.
Yeah, say nothing. Say nothing. Anyway, I got this photograph from Linda, and said, I don't think any women and children worked in Leominster. And I looked at it and I said, did you see the women in the center of this picture? Oh, okay. And then my son blows it up on our computer screen, and I'm like, wait a minute, there's a boy there. And one of the girls is this one here on the end. She's got massive hands because she is not done growing. She looks like she's probably about 14 or 15. So, I mean, not a lot of kids, and certainly not little kids, but there were definitely, under that definition we have today of children, children working there, they wouldn't have considered a 14-year-old a child.
Right.
Yeah, they wouldn't have. But this one here in the front, he looks like he's about 14 or 15. You know, they wouldn't have considered a child. Now, Leominster was very diverse with their manufactory.
Yeah.
Very diverse, kind of like early Hopedale before it became a monolith, you know, where they were doing all sorts of combs, papers, shirts, plastic, you know, a lot of stuff going on. Now, Leominster is not Fitchburg, but there was a woman wrote about the workforce in Fitchburg and Worcester and said that it was basically those two cities had a male workforce because it was higher paid, it was dangerous work, and there was no reason for the women to work because the men made more money, which is a load of crap because the Royal Worcester Corset Company was basically all women. Now, why? I don't know if it was because it was corsets and it would have just become a crazy place if you put men there making corsets. I don't know. Testosterone and corsets and all sorts of things flying. I have yeah, seriously. I don't know, but that was basically an all-female workforce. We've lost so many records when Drapers went down because it was a hostile takeover in the 1960s and the doors closed at the end of the 70s. And they were, I have had grown men, old grown men come up to me who worked at Drapers with tears in their eyes talking about the stuff that was going in the dumpster that they tried to save and they couldn't. You're right. If you lose the records, if Leominster didn't have the records of the kids that were working there, or if they did and they didn't put down 14 years old, how would you know? This photograph tells us a lot more than any of the records would, but we got no names. And Drapers also pretended they didn't have women working there too. Please, please. I know they did, not only because of that picture over there under the Draper Company banner, but my neighbor started working for Drapers when she was young in about 1914. And she was not the first. There were already about 10 women working there. And women had worked at the Dutcher Temple Company and all the other companies before Drapers formed. And they formed in, I think it was around 1890. They consolidated and became the Draper Company and then Draper Corporation, and now they're gone. The building's been torn down. It was sad looking up all of these awesome buildings in this area and seeing that they had been repurposed and turned into like lofts and you know, whatever, I don't care how much they cost, at least you've repurposed. All of Draper's is gone.
Did this site go under the reservoir?
I believe so, because these pictures are from Digital Commonwealth. I think it's the Boylston Historical Society. And this is the West Boylston. These are there were, what, 5 churches and 8 mills or something in West Boylston? I mean, the place was crazy with mills. I found a list on a Massachusetts history site, which may or may not have been a great list, but it listed 45 mill towns in Massachusetts. And I'm looking at this list thinking, there's got to be at least double that, if not triple that. They listed Milford, they listed Hopedale, they listed Clinton, they didn't list Leominster, they didn't list West Boylston, they listed Grafton, but they didn't list Upton. I mean, it was a list that was kind of, and so I was not super.
Probably because the records were missing.
Very possibly, but it's also, I think, because a bunch of towns in the 80s, 70s, and 80s, and even to the 90s went for National Register designation as a mill village, so it could have been the list from that. Hopedale did, even though you will find people in town who will say, Draper's wasn't a mill, Draper's was a factory, and they'll get into fights about it. I've seen fisticuffs, you know, they're just, Yes, people are weird. The argument is that Draper's made the equipment that went into the mills, but it were brick buildings where you made stuff. Sounds like a mill to me, but you get that argument, and it went on into the 2000s. Last one I saw was in like 2007. The place had been gone for 40 years at that point. They're still arguing. Anyway, so I found these pictures. It was hard to find pictures, and I love these because these are mills being basically depurposed for water, you know, for reservoir, which is sad and also kind of interesting. We've got West Boylston Manufacturing Company. This is the Clarendon Mills. Ezra Beeman, he went to Samuel Slater for advice. That's where you're going to get advice. And he founded the Beeman Manufacturing Company, first cotton mill in the area, and became Clarendon Mills. And I found 2 photos on the Beeman Library website, which showed mill workers. They were tiny, and I couldn't put them in here, but it looked like there were women, for sure, in those pictures. I couldn't really tell because I couldn't blow them up if there were kids in the pictures, but it was not uncommon. I would say, unless you're dealing with serious, heavy machinery manufacturing like Draper's did in Hopedale, you're going to have children working for you. And Draper's hired kids to be shuttle boys. So it was not uncommon to do it, even if you had a dangerous situation. And there's the flume. I had to look up what a flume was.
Still there.
Yeah, it's for regulating the water pressure because, yeah, it's really hard to run a power mill off of water power. You don't get good cloth in this country until you get electric power. Yeah, I'm going to assume, I don't know where the flume is. I love the little building though. I want that to be my house. I love that. It's just, yeah, it's just so awesome. Now, anytime you have mills and workers, you often had housing. I didn't go into the housing a lot because, yeah, this also, I guess, was housing in Boylston, but it says the Lancaster Mills, which is confusing. And it's definitely worker housing. This isn't a mill building, this is worker housing. And I put in a picture of Prospect Heights, which was some of Draper's worker housing. This was their cheap worker housing for the immigrants. This was for the Armenians and the Portuguese, which they were actively recruiting to come to work at Draper's, but they didn't want them living in Hopedale, so Prospect Heights is in Milford, right over the town line. I know, it's crazy. It's crazy. They have worker housing in Hopedale. It's gorgeous. It's duplexes that were designed by architects. I grew up in one. They're big houses. They were so big that people would rent out rooms and put boarders in their attic because they could, because the houses were enormous. They didn't want the Italians, the Armenians, the Portuguese. The Irish, yeah, they'd already passed that, because they'd been here longer. But they didn't want those newbies in Hopedale. So they built Prospect Heights in Milford. And did you want to say something? Sorry, I've got my readers on.
What years are we talking about recruiting in Armenia?
They were recruiting before World War I. Prospect Heights is built around 1910, 1909.
Armenian massacres?
Yes.
So they saw an opportunity?
Well, they did. General Draper, who the Italians in Milford revered, he actually wrote to Marston Whitten of the Whitten Machine Works in Whitensville and said, don't hire Italians. Go to the Portuguese or the Armenians. They're better workers. Yeah.
Well,
We have
racism's nothing new.
Oh, it is not. Oh my God, it is not. Anyway, the Italians in Milford wanted to build houses in Hopedale because they were walking 2.5 miles to get to work. This is right over the town line, but they're down in the plains, which is like 2.5 miles down near the Catholic Church. And the Drapers won't let them. They act like they own the whole town. So they go to Mendon, and right at the crest of Route 16 in Mendon, where the town line is, they build just on the other side in Mendon, the Italian families. And I found the article and they never name these people in the article, they just call them the non-English speaking people. And it's like, oh my God. These are the people that go on strike in Hopedale in 1913. It's the non-English speaking people. And they are meeting with the IWW in what they call the Brick Village. There is no other brick village in Milford but these row houses. There are many of them. There's like 60 of them. Yeah, they're tiny. I met a woman who's going to be 100 this month, who grew up at Prospect Heights, and they had a toilet and sink but no bathtub. Her mother would have this collapsible bath that she would set up once a week, put water in it and bathe her kids. They were 5 of them living in, I think it was 3 bedrooms with the toilet and sink, and that's it. And she tried with her family and her brothers and sisters and her friends to go down the hill to swim in Hopedale Pond one hot summer day. And the matron at the pond said, go back to Prospect Heights, you don't live in Hopedale. Her dad worked at Draper's and she couldn't swim because she was Armenian. She was Armenian. She was not allowed in Hopedale. Yeah, my grandfather worked there for 40 plus years, plus all 6 of his brothers, because there were 7 of them plus I think 4 daughters in that family. They were from Milford. My grandfather lived on Chestnut Street in Milford. When he retired in 1964, he bought a house right down the street from us on Dutcher Street, one of the single families, which would have been management housing. I lived in a duplex. So we could walk to their house. Yep. He didn't want his sons working for Draper's. He hated them.
Did he hate them?
Oh, yeah.
See, my father didn't. Totally
Yeah, I know a lot of people didn't.
My parents didn't. Totally different experience.
Community House was built by George Albert Draper, who was George Draper's middle son. His son, Wycliffe Draper, racist, serious racist, founded the Pioneer Fund, still to this day works to promote white supremacy. Yeah, yeah. It still exists, and that's where the Draper millions went. because Wycliffe Draper got all of his father's money. His father dies, they say, oh, George Albert Draper left $200,000 to this place and $100,000 here, and he left $10 million. So it's a drop in the bucket that he left to other things, and he left the $10 million to his 2 children. Daughter dies, son gets it all. It goes into this pioneer fund and is used to fight the Civil Rights Act in 1964. This is where the Draper money went. So it's really hard for me as someone who grew up in Hopedale to remember this and to find this out.
Different time. Different people, different time. So
It's not, I know, but it's not a different time.
that, I mean, I agree with what you're saying, but
If you look at Hopedale in the 2020 census figures, I think our non-white is less than 1%.
different time.
2020? The 2020 census? Our non-white population in Hopedale.
That can be said of a lot of areas.
Oh, it can be. I'm not blaming Hopedale. A lot of small towns in Massachusetts are like that.
No, I know what you're saying.
Yeah. It's just hard for me as a historian to know this. I have a hard time with it. Yes, I'm sorry. I'm on a tangent. Make me stop. Make me stop. You guys want to eat. Make me stop.
Grants are a good thing once in a while.
I'll go to this one.
Before
The
we
end.
started- Before we started,
But the Depression also changed it because you finally get child labor acts passing in Congress saying children can't work under the age of 14. And that ends it. But it's done during the Depression to keep companies from hiring children rather than grown men because they can pay children less. That's what changes it. And you also have that idea of childhood being childhood. And children are supposed to be educated, but there's a caveat to that law that they passed. It doesn't count on farms. You can hire children to work on farms. Yeah, thank you for coming. So it only counts in certain particularly dangerous areas. And we have changed our ideas. That's why I started with the idea of childhood. We've changed our ideas of what a child is. We don't look at a 14-year-old boy and think that kid should be getting a job. We think that kid should be in school, because we've changed that. And people like Bronson Alcott kind of pushed us in that direction. But things like the Depression made it so that the legislature finally went, and it was, FDR and complete Democratic control of both houses that pushed that over. They tried before. Lewis Hines' whole purpose as he quit his job as a teacher and became a photographer of this thing, of children working, was to make it stop. To make people see that this was a dangerous situation, that kids were dying, that they weren't being educated, and it doesn't happen in his lifetime. So, like I said, my son was working at 14. He loved it. I wouldn't.
Working full time.
No. And he was working at a job he loved, and he kept the money. It wasn't keeping us afloat.
Always say it at the end of the week going,
Yeah.
like my
Yeah.
great-grandmother was according to Leslie.
Yes, because they had to. Parents wanted their kids to work because you had to. It doesn't happen as much now. But kids work now. It's just different. It's just different. And this is a total aside, but the women in Hopedale were voting and in town office in the 1840s. And none of them lived to get the right to vote. Not a one.
Well, yeah,
And-
that would have been
Yeah.
a long time.
Yes. They spoke at the 1850 National Women's Rights Convention in Worcester. So anyway, this is Women's History Month. Pick up a book about women's history and read some stuff. It's always worth it.